The rain fell softly on the cemetery that autumn morning, little droplets collecting on Sarah Winter's umbrella as she knelt before the memorial stone. 22 years had passed, but the pain remained as sharp as the day her sister vanished. Sarah placed a small bouquet of white lilies against the granite, a ritual she had maintained since they'd finally given up the search and accepted that Rebecca was gone, though no body had ever been found. "I still remember," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle patter of rain. "I won't ever forget you, Becca." Rebecca Winters had disappeared on her way home from her shift at the local library on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday evening in September 2001. The chaos of the weeks following 9/11 had overshadowed her case. Resources stretched thin, media attention focused elsewhere. By the time the full investigation gained momentum, the trail had gone cold. Just another missing person in a city of millions. Sarah glanced at her watch. She needed to get back to her apartment in Brooklyn before her afternoon meeting. As director of a victim support organization, her work helped fill the void left by her sister's disappearance. It gave purpose to the pain, meaning to the loss. The drive back was quiet, just the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers and the soft hum of the radio. Sarah had long ago stopped expecting closure. The detectives had retired, witnesses had moved away, and life had simply continued for everyone except Rebecca. When Sarah entered her apartment, she noticed the blinking light on her answering machine. In an age of cell phones, she kept the landline mostly out of habit, and partly because it was the number Rebecca had known. "Ms. Winters, this is Detective Ramirez from the NYPD Cold Case Unit. I'd like to speak with you regarding your sister's case. Please call me back at your earliest convenience." Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for her phone. The Cold Case Unit had contacted her periodically over the years, usually to inform her that they were reviewing old files or that new technology might offer fresh insights, but nothing had ever come of it. "Detective Ramirez, this is Sarah Winters returning your call. Ms. Winters, thank you for calling back. I was wondering if you might be able to come down to the station tomorrow morning. We've had a development in your sister's case." Sarah's heart quickened. "A development? What kind of development? I'd rather discuss it in person if that's all right with you." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She pulled out the old box she kept under her bed, newspaper clippings, photographs, Rebecca's journal, and the case file copies the original detective had slipped to her years ago, against department policy. She spread the photos across her bed, studying her sister's face, the bright smile, the intelligent eyes. Rebecca had been 24 when she vanished, a graduate student in library science with dreams of someday running the New York Public Library's rare books collection. One photo caught Sarah's attention, a group picture taken at a library fundraiser a week before Rebecca disappeared. Sarah had looked at this photo hundreds of times over the years, but tonight something seemed different. In the background, partially obscured but clearly watching Rebecca, was a man Sarah recognized, Martin Keegan, the library's head of security at the time. He'd been interviewed during the initial investigation, of course, but nothing had come of it. What struck Sarah now was the intensity of his gaze. How had she never noticed before? And then she remembered the detectives had focused on Rebecca's ex-boyfriend initially, and by the time they widened their investigation, Keegan had left his position, citing a family emergency in another state. Sarah grabbed her laptop and searched for Martin Keegan. Nothing recent came up, but an article from 2005 mentioned him working security at a university library in Connecticut. The trail seemed to end there. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the police station, the photo tucked safely in her purse. Detective Ramirez was younger than she expected, probably in her late 30s, with intelligent eyes and a gentle but professional demeanor. "Ms. Winters, thank you for coming in." She led Sarah to a small conference room rather than an interview room, which Sarah took as a positive sign. "You said there was a development?" Sarah couldn't keep the tremor from her voice. Detective Ramirez nodded, opening a file folder. Last month, a construction crew working on renovations at the New York Public Library's main branch discovered something behind a section of wall that was being removed, a hidden room that wasn't on any building plans. Sarah's breath caught. And they found personal items that we've confirmed belonged to your sister, her ID badge, a necklace that matches the description in her missing persons report, and a journal. Sarah clutched the edge of the table. Did they find? No human remains, Ramirez said quickly. Just the items. But it's the first physical evidence we've had in 22 years. And there was something else. The journal contained entries that suggest Rebecca was concerned about someone at work. She never named the person, but she described feeling watched, uncomfortable. Sarah reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out the photograph. I think it might have been this man, she said, pointing to Keegan in the background. Martin Keegan. He was head of security at the library when Becca disappeared. Detective Ramirez studied the photo, her expression changing subtly. Ms. Winters, this is actually why I called you in today. Martin Keegan was arrested yesterday in Connecticut. A routine background check for a new security position flagged inconsistencies in his identity. When they ran his fingerprints, they matched prints we found in that hidden room. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her. After 22 years of questions, was she finally going to learn what happened to her sister? We need your help, Ramirez continued. We're building a case, but we need to understand Rebecca's movements, her relationships at the library. Anything you can remember or find might help us finally get justice for your sister. For the first time in 22 years, Sarah felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. Sarah spent the following week in a daze, alternating between hope and dread. The cold case that had defined her adult life was suddenly active again. Detective Ramirez had been forthcoming but cautious. Martin Keegan was being held on identity fraud charges while they built their case regarding Rebecca. Without a body, they needed compelling evidence to prove foul play. We'd like you to walk through the library with us, Ramirez said when she called on Friday. The renovation team has paused work on that section. We need someone who knew Rebecca, her routines. Sometimes small details can break a case wide open. The next morning, Sarah found herself standing on the grand steps of the New York Public Library's main branch on Fifth Avenue. The marble lions seemed to watch her with solemn understanding as she climbed the stairs. Detective Ramirez was waiting in the lobby with an older man who introduced himself as Detective Morris, one of the original investigators on Rebecca's case. I remember you, Sarah said quietly. You brought coffee to my parents' house when you came to ask questions. Morris nodded, his eyes softening. Your sister's case never sat right with me. I retired 7 years ago, but when Ramirez called about the breakthrough, I had to come back. They walked through the library in silence, past reading rooms where Rebecca had once helped patrons. Sarah could almost see her sister's ghost, head bent over a cart of books, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear as she worked. The room was discovered here, Ramirez said, as they approached a section cordoned off with construction barriers. She showed her badge to the officer standing guard, and he lifted the tape to allow them through. Behind the barrier, a portion of the wall had been removed, revealing a space roughly 6 feet wide and 10 feet deep, a maintenance area that had been walled off decades ago, according to the building plans. Evidence markers dotted the space. Rebecca's things were found in this corner, Morris explained, pointing to a spot where the concrete floor met the wall, tucked into a small cavity beneath a loose section of flooring. Sarah stared at the space, trying to understand how her sister could be connected to this forgotten room. Would she have known about this place? We're looking into that, Ramirez said. The renovation supervisor told us these maintenance spaces existed throughout the building before a 1980s remodel. Most were sealed off, but some staff might have known about them. Like the head of security, Sarah whispered. Exactly, Ramirez nodded. We've interviewed former employees. Several mentioned that Keegan seemed particularly knowledgeable about the building's layout, including areas not on modern floor plans. As they exited the cordoned area, Sarah asked, "Have you interviewed Keegan yet?" "Yes," Morris replied. "He's denying any knowledge of your sister's disappearance, claims he left New York for a family emergency in 2001 and never returned. His lawyer is pushing hard for his release, arguing that being in the same photo as Rebecca and having his prints in a public building where he worked isn't enough to hold him." "What do you need to build a stronger case?" Sarah asked. "Connections," Ramirez explained. "We need to establish a pattern of interaction between Keegan and your sister, something beyond them simply working in the same building." That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment and emptied the contents of Rebecca's box onto her dining table. She arranged the items chronologically: birthday cards, letters, photos, the journal Rebecca had kept the year before she disappeared. Sarah had read it countless times over the years, searching for clues, but had never found anything conclusive. She began reading again, this time with fresh eyes, looking specifically for any mention of security staff or Martin Keegan. Most entries were ordinary: Rebecca's thoughts on books she was reading, frustrations with her graduate studies, notes about friends and colleagues. Then, 3 weeks before her disappearance, an entry caught Sarah's attention. "Kay offered to show me the rare manuscript storage today. Said there are spaces in the building nobody knows about anymore, where they used to keep the most valuable items during wartime. It's tempting. I've always wanted to see those areas, but something about him makes me uneasy. Maybe it's just that he watches too intently." Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. "Detective Ramirez? I found something in Rebecca's journal. She mentioned someone with the initial K, showing her hidden spaces in the library." The next morning, Sarah met Ramirez at a coffee shop near the library. The detective brought along a file folder. "We've been going through the library's employment records," she explained. "Keegan's personnel file had several complaints from female employees, nothing that reached the level of formal action, but enough to establish a pattern of making women uncomfortable." She pulled out a staff directory from 2001. "Look at this." She pointed to Keegan's entry, which listed his full name as Martin Kenneth Keegan. He went by Kenneth or Ken with some staff members. Your sister might have referred to him as K in her journal. "That has to be him," Sarah said, feeling simultaneously validated and sickened. "There's more," Ramirez continued. "We've been looking into Keegan's movements after he left New York. He's worked at 6 different libraries or academic institutions across 3 states. At each one, a female staff member or student filed some form of complaint. Unwanted attention, uncomfortable encounters. He'd leave before anything escalated to formal charges." "A pattern," Sarah whispered. "Yes, but no disappearances or confirmed assaults. Your sister's case appears to be an escalation, if he was involved." Ramirez hesitated. "I need to ask you a difficult question. Did Rebecca ever mention feeling threatened by anyone at work? Not just uncomfortable, but afraid?" Sarah closed her eyes, thinking back to their last conversations. "She mentioned a guy at work who was intense, but she brushed it off, said she could handle it." Sarah's voice broke. "I should have pressed her for details." "This isn't your fault," Ramirez said firmly. "Based on everything we've learned about Keegan, he was careful, methodical. He built trust before betraying it." On the way home, Sarah took a detour past the library again. Standing before the majestic building, she tried to imagine her sister's final moments there. Had she followed Keegan willingly to see some hidden architectural feature? Had she been forced? The questions that had haunted Sarah for 22 years now had possible answers just beyond reach. That night, Sarah dreamt of Rebecca for the first time in years. In the dream, her sister was standing in a dim room, pointing at a wall. "Look closer," she kept saying. "It's all here if you just look closer." Sarah woke with a start, her sister's words echoing in her mind. She reached for Rebecca's journal again, flipping through the pages with renewed purpose. Near the back, she found a page where Rebecca had pressed so hard with her pen that the impressions were visible on several subsequent pages. The entry described a staff event at the library, the same event captured in the photograph Sarah had shown Detective Ramirez. "Kay cornered me by the rare manuscripts display," Rebecca had written. Said he had something special to show me tomorrow after closing. When I declined, he seemed angry before quickly covering it up, said it was a limited opportunity, that the area would be sealed up again during next month's maintenance. I've decided to avoid late shifts for a while. Something doesn't feel right. The entry was dated September 17, 2001, the day before Rebecca disappeared. Sarah called Detective Ramirez immediately, reading her the journal entry word for word. There was a long silence on the line before the detective spoke. "Sarah, this could be the connection we've been looking for. I need you to bring the journal in right away." As Sarah hung up the phone, a notification appeared on her laptop, a news alert she'd set up for Martin Keegan's name. The headline made her blood run cold. "Suspect in cold case investigation released on bail, insufficient evidence to hold." Sarah's hands shook as she clutched Rebecca's journal to her chest in the back of the taxi. Keegan was out on bail. The thought of him walking free sent chills down her spine. The cab crawled through midtown traffic as Sarah called Detective Ramirez again. "I just saw the news," she said when the detective answered. "How could they release him? His lawyer made a compelling case that we didn't have enough to hold him," Ramirez explained, frustration evident in her voice. "But we're still building our case, Sarah. The journal entry you found is significant. We've also subpoenaed records from the other institutions where he worked. We're establishing a pattern." "Where is he now?" "He has to stay in the city and check in daily with his parole officer. We have officers watching him." Ramirez paused. "Sarah, I need you to be careful. Don't approach him if you see him. Don't try to investigate on your own. Let us handle this." The warning only intensified Sarah's sense of urgency. 22 years of waiting, of not knowing, of imagining worst-case scenarios. She couldn't bear more delays. At the precinct, Sarah handed over Rebecca's journal to be properly documented as evidence. Detective Morris joined them, his weathered face grave. "There's something else you should know," he said once they were seated in the conference room. "We've been interviewing former library employees who worked with both Rebecca and Keegan. A former maintenance worker came forward yesterday. He remembers Keegan asking detailed questions about the sealed maintenance spaces back in 2001, specifically about which ones weren't on current building plans." "So he was planning something," Sarah said. "It appears that way," Ramirez nodded. "And there's more. We've been analyzing the items found in that hidden room. Rebecca's library ID badge had partial fingerprints that match Keegan's, and the journal found there has entries that match your sister's handwriting from the journal you've kept." "So it is Becca's?" Sarah asked, her throat tightening. "Yes. The last entry is dated September 18, 2001, the day she disappeared." Sarah felt a chill run through her. "What does it say?" Ramirez hesitated, then slid a photocopy across the table. The handwriting was familiar but shaky, the words pressed hard into the page. "He tricked me, claimed there was a rare first edition that had been misplaced. Now I'm locked in this room. No one can hear me calling for help. The walls are too thick. He said he'll come back later when everyone is gone. I'm afraid of what will happen then." Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she read her sister's final words. "This proves he was involved. This proves he trapped her there." It's compelling evidence," Morris acknowledged, "but his lawyer will argue that without Rebecca herself, we can't prove what happened after this entry was written. We need more." Sarah wiped her eyes, a sudden thought occurring to her. "The renovations at the library, they removed that wall recently, right? What if Rebecca is still in that building somewhere, in another hidden space?" The detectives exchanged glances. "We've considered that possibility," Ramirez said carefully. "Ground-penetrating radar is scheduled for tomorrow. We're also bringing in cadaver dogs to search thoroughly." "I want to be there," Sarah said firmly. "That's not standard procedure," Morris began. "I've waited 22 years, Sarah interrupted. "Please, I need to be there." After some discussion, they agreed that Sarah could be present, but would need to remain outside the search areas with a victim advocate. As she left the precinct, Sarah felt both dread and determination. The truth was finally coming to light, one painful piece at a time. The next morning dawned grey and drizzling, the weather matching Sarah's mood as she approached the library. A small group of officers and specialists had gathered at a side entrance, away from public view and media attention. Detective Ramirez introduced Sarah to Lauren, a victim advocate who would stay with her throughout the process. The technical team has identified 3 additional sealed spaces that aren't on current floor plans, Ramirez explained. They're starting with those. The hours crawled by as Sarah waited in a small office that had been set aside for her. Lauren brought coffee and spoke in gentle tones about the process, but Sarah barely registered her words. Her mind was filled with images of her sister alone in the dark, waiting for help that never came. Shortly after noon, there was a knock at the door. Detective Morris entered, his expression somber but determined. "We've found something," he said. "In a sealed maintenance space near the old boiler room. There's a hidden entrance behind a bookshelf in an adjacent storage room." Sarah stood, her legs unsteady. Is she? "We've found human remains," he confirmed gently. "We'll need DNA confirmation, but given the location and the items found with the remains, we believe it's Rebecca." Sarah sank back into her chair, a strange sense of relief washing over her despite the heartbreak. After 22 years of uncertainty, of hoping against hope that somehow Rebecca was still alive somewhere, there was finally an answer. Her sister hadn't abandoned them. She hadn't run away. She had been there all along, hidden within walls that thousands of people passed by every day. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "We're securing an arrest warrant for Keegan based on this new evidence," Morris explained. "The prosecutor believes we now have enough for a murder charge." "Will you find him in time?" Sarah asked, remembering he was out on bail. "We have officers watching him," Ramirez assured her. "He's not going anywhere." 3 days later, Sarah sat in the courtroom as Martin Keegan was arraigned on charges of kidnapping and murder. He looked smaller than she had imagined, older, his face lined and expressionless as the charges were read. Sarah tried to see the monster who had taken her sister, but found only a pathetic, aging man who had hidden his crimes for decades. The prosecutor approached Sarah after the hearing. "The evidence is strong," she assured her. "The DNA results confirmed the remains are Rebecca's. We found fibers from Keegan's uniform caught in her clothing, preserved all these years. And there's more. A hidden camera was discovered in the room where Rebecca was found. It appears Keegan recorded his victims. The device was still there, though damaged by time and moisture." "Victims, plural?" Sarah asked, her blood running cold. "We've identified 2 other missing persons cases that may be connected to Keegan, women who disappeared from institutions where he worked after leaving New York. We're reopening those investigations now." The realization that Rebecca wasn't his only victim brought fresh pain, but also grim validation. The pattern they'd started to uncover was real. Keegan was exactly what they'd suspected. A predator who had moved from place to place, hiding in plain sight within respected institutions. A week later, as the media frenzy around the case began to subside, Sarah returned to the cemetery where Rebecca's memorial stone stood. Soon, they would have a proper burial, a real grave where she could finally rest. The knowledge brought a measure of peace Sarah hadn't expected to find. As she placed fresh lilies against the stone, her phone rang. Detective Ramirez. "I thought you'd want to know," the detective said without preamble. "Keegan has agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He's also providing information on the other cases we suspected him in." "Why would he confess now?" Sarah asked, "after hiding it for so long? The evidence is overwhelming, and I think in some way he's relieved it's over. He's been living under assumed names, moving constantly, always looking over his shoulder. Some criminals find confession liberating." After hanging up, Sarah sat beside the memorial stone, processing everything. The community would be shocked by Keegan's plea. The quiet security officer, who had worked among them for years, now revealed as a calculated killer. The library where Rebecca had loved to work had become her tomb. The truth was far more painful than the uncertainty had been. Yet Sarah felt the first genuine sense of closure in 22 years. "We found you, Becca," she whispered to the stone. "You can rest now, and so can I." In the days that followed, Sarah helped the detectives connect with the families of Keegan's other suspected victims. Together, they formed a small community of survivors, supporting each other through the painful process of finally learning the truth after years of wondering. Some of the women had disappeared as recently as 5 years ago. Others had been missing for over a decade. The New York Public Library established a memorial reading room dedicated to Rebecca and the other victims, a quiet space filled with books on healing, justice, and resilience. It was there that Sarah finally felt her sister's presence again, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a catalyst for change. Rebecca's case had exposed a predator and brought closure to multiple families who had lived with the same questions that had haunted Sarah for 22 years. "Your sister helped us find him," Detective Morris told her at the dedication ceremony. "Without her journal, without the evidence she left behind, he might never have been caught." Sarah nodded, finding comfort in the idea that even in her final moments, Rebecca had fought back in her own way, leaving clues that would eventually lead to justice. The cold case from 2001 was finally closed, and the community that had been shocked by the arrest could now begin to heal, knowing that truth had finally emerged from behind the walls where it had been hidden for far too long.